This week's episode is brought to you by World Land Trust. They're a conservation charity that has been protecting the world's most biologically significant and threatened habitats for more than 35 years. As we all face up to the consequences of climate change, it can be hard to know how to be part of the solution. But with World Land Trust, you can take action. Its project Buy an Acre gives you the power to take a practical step to steer the world away from irreversible harm. For each £100 donated by our listeners, one of World Land Trust's partners will buy an acre of land under threat of deforestation. And once safely purchased, the land will be restored and conserved in cooperation with local communities. Already, with the support of people like you, Buy an Acre has bought and protected over 3.3 million acres of land worldwide. So join World Land Trust now and start saving land and species, acre by acre. You can find out more at worldlandtrust.org. It's the week ending Friday the 11th of July, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen devastating floods in Texas and New Mexico, killing more than 100 people. Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron announcing a so-called one-in, one-out deal aimed at curbing illegal boat crossings from France, and Black Sabbath performing their final ever gig at Villa Park in Birmingham. You can read all you need to know about everything that matters in The Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And as ever, I am joined from the week's digital team by Timson and Harriet Marsden, and by senior editor of The Week Junior, Felicity Capon. Talking of Black Sabbath, guys, is there a band that you would like to see before they retire forever?
I mean, mine was Fleetwood Mac, but they're somewhat depleted of late. So
you could just go and see the play that's sort of definitely not about them.
I have seen the play. I have seen Stereophonic, actually. I saw it recently. I saw it a couple of weeks ago.
Felicity, I'm guessing you've already been to ABBA Voyage and that's ticked all the boxes for you.
I haven't been to ABBA Voyage.
What?
Voyage. No, yeah, no,
I've never been. Down as an ABBA Voyage person.
You should definitely go. I went on a stag do to ABBA Voyage.
I've seen many ABBA tribute bands, which is always a great night, but
you got to go, Felicity. It's amazing.
I know.
It's genuinely the best. It's the best experience you can have in London.
It is really good, isn't it? It's all the best bits of cinema and a gig, and it's over in time to get home in the car. Felicity, you're up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Is this the week we found out that the jury really is out?
I have severe doubts about our judiciary at the moment. I'm not sure they're going in the right direction. And when I read the adult court bench book, it gives me even greater concerns. The jury trial is already under threat, as you probably know, in defamation cases. So I have three questions. Why does the government appear to be so terrified of decent British people sitting on juries? Are the government intent on further undermining the jury trial? And if they are, in any way, will they please undertake to have a full debate in this House before it happens?
Reform UK MP Rupert Lowe speaking in Parliament on Wednesday. Felicity, why was he asking those questions this week?
Well, thousands of cases that would normally be heard by a jury should be heard by a judge. And that's according to proposals that were published this week by former senior judge Sir Brian Leveson.
Leveson Inquiry fame?
Exactly, correct. Sir Brian has rightly identified that the entire system is in dire straits, and he is arguing that we need fundamental reform to reduce the risk of total system collapse. And that's partly due to an insane number of backlogs of cases. So
give us a number, define insane.
I think it's somewhere between 77 to 80,000, and that's expected to rise to 100,000 without radical action.
Wow. So these are people waiting for their court case for years.
Yeah, exactly, years. So in London, people are being told that their case won't be heard until 2029, and these include rape cases, sexual assault cases. Entire lives are on hold because they're just not getting their case seen to.
And so the thrust of his proposal is don't have juries on so many cases and then we can get through the backlog quicker.
Yes. So it's kind of complicated. At the moment, the most serious cases can only be tried in the Crown Court, and the least serious cases are heard in the magistrates' court, but a large number can be tried either way. There's quite a few things that he's suggesting, but this one is the one that's making the headlines. He's proposing an intermediate court, which would deal with some of these cases, those involving a maximum sentence of 2 or 3 years. And the offences that would be heard in this kind of intermediate court would include theft, the handling of stolen goods, criminal damage, and some forms of assault. And also a very kind of popular one is complex fraud, that he's arguing should only be heard by a judge because, ordinary people just don't understand simple fraud, let alone complex fraud.
Okay, so just leaving aside the merits of whether jury trials are things we want in all cases that they currently happen, Jamie, the practice of setting up a new court doesn't sound like an easy solution. That sounds like a complicated administrative thing to do.
No, and I think it's worth, when you're thinking about the kind of Leveson, the terms of reference for his report and for the recommendations that he set out, the government actually said that he couldn't recommend increased funding. What they wanted was recommendations on systemic reform. Basically, he has said that the backlog is caused by kind of chronic underfunding from government over the course of the last 25 years, but the government isn't allowing him to say that we need to put more money into it. They want other ideas. And when you kind of see it through this lens, because Felicity's right, like, there are a huge number of recommendations, some of which are probably very interesting. And, I've read some barristers gone on Twitter saying that actually he does recommend quite a few, important ways to change the system. But the thing that was always going to get the most attention was the removal of jury trials for some cases. And it is about money. One of the examples that one barrister that I read was suggesting was that actually the number of days that the Crown Courts can sit is capped. And I didn't know this before I read into it. So it's currently capped at 111,000, which obviously sounds mad when there's only 365 days in a year, but it's around the country. And so some places just can't actually sit on as many days as they want to, and a lot of courts are closed. And so if they change the cap on that situation, then maybe we could get through more cases, was one of the examples that these people put up. But I am, we'll get into the merits of it, but I am quite shocked that this could be coming about, because I do kind of see jury duty as being one of the kind of last vestiges of like the way that we interact with the state and the way that we kind of perform a duty as citizens. And this kind of acceptance, if it is accepted, obviously we have to be clear that this isn't law. These are just recommendations. There's no guarantee that it will get through. But if it is accepted, it is quite shocking.
Have you ever sat on a jury, Harriet?
Yeah, I have. And actually, I think that I see it slightly differently. I see it through that lens of personally sat on a jury and quite a serious criminal trial. And without going into too much detail, although I was very excited, as Jamie says, to kind of participate as a citizen in our legal system, what I actually experienced in my time on a jury really damaged my faith in our legal system. And I can only speak from my own experience, not anyone else's, but I was really disappointed and kind of frankly astonished with how I experienced a jury trial and the kind of ridiculousness of having certain types of cases heard by non-experts and decided on by people who may have represented the community, but also were kind of chosen at random from that area. And they were all essentially middle-class, white, English heritage jurors adjudicating on a trial that involved racially aggravated assault.
Yeah, but hold on, that's more likely to happen in the judiciary, isn't it? It's more likely that the judges are going to be probably upper-class white men.
One of the main arguments for the pros of a jury trial is obviously that it's meant to be more representative and fairer and kind of a wider cross-section of society. And I do think that there are really strong arguments both for and against jury trials, and we can go into those in more detail. But personally, serving on a jury, I found it to be a profoundly dispiriting experience.
There's been so many sort of like infamous cases of juries just getting it horribly wrong. And part of the The downside, I suppose, with having a jury is they never have to give their reasons, and you never know what's going on behind the scenes. Whereas if you have a judge, they do have to give their reasons. And obviously judges aren't free from bias. But I was thinking about the Vicky Pryce fiasco in 2013, which has got to be one of the most notable examples of a total jury fail.
So this was the wife of the Liberal Democrat Chris Huhne, and she took his speeding points.
Yeah,
right?
She was...
Interesting case to bring up. What was the issue?
Well, she was accused and eventually convicted of perverting the course of justice for taking these speeding points. But the jury kept on coming back to the judge with so many basic questions that they had to ask what the definition of reasonable doubt was. And the judge said reasonable doubt is reasonable doubt, basically. And they also asked, can a juror come to a verdict based on a reason that was not presented in court and has no facts or evidence to support it, either from the prosecution or defence? So, had completely not understood what their purpose was for. And also a very, very famous and quite funny case in 1993 of jurors who consulted a Ouija board. That was R.V. Young, who it was a murder case, and they decided to consult the spirits of the dead to find out how they'd been murdered. And that is actually true. You can see that there are problems with juries. A lot of people say that they are also, part of our national identity. That's partly why I chose Rupert Lowe as my clip, because obviously this feels like something that Reform are going to go big on, because, people like to say it goes all the way back to Henry II and the Magna Carta, and this is part of our civic duty and what makes us as British.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it, politically, Jamie? This is very much the sort of cause célèbre that Reform like. We are anti the idea of removing juries because juries are a fundamental British right. But at the same time, political parties like Reform like to be tough on law and order. And as Felicity was suggesting there, actually, having a jury of your peers decide whether or not you did it, and you can influence them using charm and wiles, it's more likely you're going to get off, even if you did do it, than if a judge sort of coldly and sort of impartially weighs up the facts, some argue.
Yeah, I think that the argument for getting off is less strong than being convicted if you're innocent. I think most people would say that in terms of justice, convicting innocent people is perhaps worse. This is my broad brushstrokes assessment based on Reform's potential voters. I really do see Reform taking this up as a cause célèbre. I think that the arguments that Harriet and Felicity make about the kind of education of the people on the jury is more of an argument for better education of people at a younger level to understand their role in society than it is to get rid of juries. I fundamentally believe that 12 random voices from society is always going to provide a fairer outcome than 3 narrow, as you said, a lot of the time it will be judges that are court judges that are volunteering to then sit in these criminal situations. They might have to see so many cases day after day that eventually they'll get kind of tired, and that's natural. My worry with getting rid of trial by jury is that we end up in a situation a bit like we were discussing last week, where yes, maybe this government takes this on and just removes it for some offences, but the next government might remove it for all the offences, and we could be in a much worse state from that perspective.
I think it's just fair to clarify that we're not talking about doing away with jury trials for the most serious cases. So those, for example, that involve murder or rape or severe violence and assault or sexual assault, they would still be heard in a Crown Court in front of a judge and a jury. What we're talking about, these proposed intermediate courts, they would hear cases that are the so-called either way offences that we were outlining, so that already a defendant could choose for their case to be heard by a magistrate or a Crown Court with a jury trial.
So what kind of offences are those?
So that would be stuff like dangerous driving, minor drug offences like drug possession, theft, non-serious assault. The cases that at the moment, they make up more than 50% of the Crown Court backlog. Leaving aside whether a jury trial is fair, they are very expensive. They are very, very expensive. They are also they can be very inefficient, because if a jury is not able to reach a verdict unanimously, if they can't agree or they deliberate for hours or days, that usually results in a retrial with a new jury. And in those cases, the defense would be at an advantage because the prosecution has to like surprise the defense team with new evidence, but the defense can use the knowledge of the evidence that was presented at the first trial to block all the prosecution's attack and amend what needs to be changed to make a stronger case.
Also, the jury are thinking, aren't they? Whether they're supposed to or not. They couldn't decide the first time round. This isn't clear cut.
It's unfortunately there are issues logistically with a jury trial that have nothing to do with the fairness. They're also to do with the procedure and the fact that a jury trial means materially increases the chance that you'll be acquitted of a crime, because as we were saying, it's much more difficult to reach that threshold of beyond reasonable doubt, agreeing that among 12 people as opposed to one judge agreeing that alone.
And of course, Jamie, there's the risk that it doesn't happen at all. We're all talking about this like it's a fait accompli, but the last time Leveson had his inquiry, not all of that got put into place, did it? I mean, this can be a recommendation that's then put to one side.
Yeah, absolutely. The government is expected to endorse the plan, and they'll introduce legislation later in the year. But as the clip showed, there'll be kind of constant issues, and MPs will bring up amendments and things like that. So yeah, there's no guarantee that this will happen. I think the other thing that we should probably talk about that we haven't really touched on is that if we do open these intermediate courts, a lot of the time they'll be dealing with people that need legal aid. The provision for legal aid or solicitors that can provide legal aid has shrunk by a third in over a decade, which means that a lot of people are unable to find, that's what's causing some of the delays, is the fact that people can't afford representation, and the representation that the state provides isn't available, or they have to cover so many different cases that they can't get to every single one. Obviously, this is a problem that can be solved by extra funding. Where that money comes from and how you fund this is a political choice, but I mean, politics is all about where you choose to fund.
We also haven't mentioned the fact that this wouldn't be a judge in an intermediate court by himself or herself. The judge would also sit alongside two magistrates, and those can be anyone. Anyone can become a magistrate. You don't need legal training. You don't need any specific qualifications. You get a legal advisor in court. You just have to be between 18 and 74 and prove that you are of good character and are committed to serving the community. So there is still an element of the general public being able to be represented there as well.
Yeah, but only the type of members of the general public who put themselves forward to rule on other people.
you could do it, Ollie. You could do it now that
I
Reader's
would do
Digest
it.
dropped
Totally
off.
appeals to me. Okay, we mentioned out-of-court settlements. I would tell you what's coming up next, but I've signed an NDA. Find out more after this. Okay, Harriet, it is your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Will non-disclosure agreements be gagged for good?
I was not allowed to ever speak to anybody about even really my time working at Miramax. I was not allowed to speak to a therapist without them signing a confidentiality agreement. I was not allowed to speak to my accountant with regards to the money that I received.
Which was how much?
It was 125,000.
Former assistant to Harvey Weinstein, Zelda Perkins, speaking to Newsnight on the BBC back in 2017. Harriet, what's the story this week?
Well, this week, the government's employment rights bill, there was an amendment tabled on Monday which could stop UK bosses from using NDAs or confidentiality clauses to silence employees who are alleging harassment or discrimination. And that was a really big surprise. That was a big surprise to campaigners. That was a big surprise to Zelda Perkins. And if the Employment Rights Bill with its tabled amendments passes the report stage next week in the House of Lords, any future confidentiality clauses in settlement agreements that are intended to prevent someone from speaking out about harassment or discrimination would be void.
And this is a long-standing campaign from people like Zelda Perkins, isn't it? I mean, that interview's from 2017. This issue's been around for a while.
Yes, so she kind of sort of inadvertently became the world's leading advocate for trying to change the rules around essentially abusive NDAs. She set up this campaign group in the UK in 2021 called Can't Buy My Silence, and sort of enlisted the help of various MPs and like, for example, Layla Moran has been very influential in this campaign. Former Conservative Minister Maria Miller, obviously Labour's Jess Phillips has been big in this as well. So she basically led the charge on putting this at the forefront of the current and previous government's mind. But she said herself in an interview with The Guardian this week that she was very surprised at how far this tabled amendment actually went.
Okay, just before we proceed any further, I mean, I think we all think we know what an NDA is, but let's just be really clear on what they are and how they're used.
Yeah, so they were originally intended to kind of protect intellectual property or commercial or sensitive information, but increasingly they've become misused to the point of obstructing justice. So as a weapon to sort of silence victims or cover up abuse or harassment. And this use has been growing, especially among people on low income or insecure, like gig economy employment, like in retail or hospitality sectors. There have been some legislative changes. So the Victims and Prisoners Act last year, which comes into effect in October this year, that legislation would mean that confidentiality clauses that prevent victims of a crime from reporting the crime would be void. And there are also certain legislative changes have happened in Ireland and bits of Canada and some parts of the US. So this is kind of there's a growing awareness around this rising misuse of NDAs basically as a tool to silence victims.
Well, I suppose if it is a misuse, Felicity, in the sense that it's an unintended consequence, I mean, it seems to me in a legal settlement, all sides understand what's happening when they sign that paper. They're agreeing to closing the matter so it doesn't get discussed anymore. And although it's not exactly great PR that could be being used to suppress someone's reputation for sexual harassment, it works both sides, doesn't it? We're not going to shame you in the media. We're not going to carry on fighting this. You're not going to mention how much you got paid. That is the nature of the non-disclosure agreement, and both parties agree to it. Is that a misuse?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, employees have always had the option to go to a tribunal and share their case publicly if they wanted to. And I think there are concerns that there are many genuine victims of harassment who would rather choose to preserve their anonymity, and this change would remove that. I think that's something that people are saying are the downside of it. And also, many of these agreements designed to silence victims would be unenforceable in court, but they work because a lot of the victims don't actually know that. It's almost like an empty threat and being scared by legal jargon and people in positions of power. And it's a lot of people who haven't received the right legal advice about what their rights are, and just a gross abuse of people in positions of power in workplaces who have kind of really taken the NDA, which was initially to, for much more innocent reasons, for protecting, trade secrets or intellectual property or that sort of thing, that has just been taken and exploited for people in power to get away with all sorts of horrible abuse and harassment, basically.
I suppose the thing is, Jamie, because these cases haven't reached court by their nature, we can't really decide ourselves whether in every case something that could be called a crime has taken place, and that there would be arguments if it went to court that it was a workplace culture, or, in the case of the classic sort of Christmas party, we were all drunk and I regretted it and I said afterwards, not really a criminal matter. We don't know that stuff, and an NDA stops us being able to interrogate it, but that might be good for the person that's being complained against as well. That might be good for both parties.
Yeah, I think I probably agree with Felicity's point that it's hard to, it's actually just quite a dispiriting kind of set of circumstances. I think that the issue with taking away NDAs and removing the chance of compensation or financial settlement is quite a key one. A lot of times people don't want to go public, obviously, with what's happened, and maybe the idea that it would end up in the court of public opinion would then mean that companies or employers are less likely to provide settlements or compensation. And obviously people do still need to live their lives after these events, and they do need to continue on with careers and things like that. So
if companies didn't have the reassurance that it wouldn't come out, then they might as well take it to court. They've got better lawyers, and then the victim gets nothing.
And it feels very like, even without NDAs, the kind of big man always wins in this situation. And so I guess there's an argument that, you know, in issues of harassment or discrimination, sometimes, and we have to allow this, sometimes the people want to take an NDA because they just want to just get over it and move on. I think that when we're talking about things like Harvey Weinstein and things like that are obviously criminal matters, that's a completely different case. And, you know, you would hope that Zelda Perkins is obviously, you know, pretty in favour of this as a campaign in situations like that. But there's obviously a massive grey area in lots of other situations.
Okay, so Harriet, I've tried to talk up some of the potential reasons why you might want the current system to stay in place, but let's really outline the egregious examples of when victims have been suppressed by these.
I think something that's worth repeating is just how widespread the use of NDAs are when dealing with allegations of sexual assault. A report by the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development last year found 22% of respondents said that their organisation used NDAs when dealing with allegations of sexual harassment. So even Amnesty International back in 2019 made a female employee sign an NDA in order to settle an equal pay dispute, which also is frequently NDAs are used to kind of shroud the gender pay gap in secrecy because there's such a lack of transparency about who's getting what and why they might be settling an equal pay dispute. And that's Amnesty International. Like that, we're talking about something that is widely used to the point of being so far from its original purpose and intention.
But isn't it widely broken as well? I mean, that's the other thing we haven't quite touched on is
we don't know how widely or not widely broken they are, because we don't know how many people have signed NDAs.
There's people have signed NDAs, and yet 10 years later they've come out and say, well, actually, you know, for example, in the Me Too movement, yes, that happened to me as well.
But for every 100 or 1,000 or 100,000, we have no idea how many people have signed NDAs. We only hear of a very few, very high profile cases. And in most cases, it's years and years and years later, and they take an enormous amount of personal risk. We should not make the mistake of talking like that's not a big deal. I mean, like Zelda Perkins was only, I think, 23 when she signed that NDA. She was extremely young, and her own legal team advised her to sign it. So to break that you'd have to be really, really, really sure that you were going to survive that.
Felicity, what else has caught your eye in this employment rights bill that hits the House of Lords next week?
I mean, it's pretty comprehensive. There's all sorts of things from banning 0 hours contracts, ending fire and rehire, protecting workers from harassment. The law will also change to make flexible working the default where practical, in inverted commas, and action plans drawn up to address gender pay gaps and to support female employees through menopause. I think there's greater rights for fathers going on paternity leave, and greater rights for women on maternity leave and coming back from their maternity leave. So there's all sorts of things.
Wow. I mean, really, that is, I mean, you know, I don't want to play down, you know, the impacts on people who have been victims of sexual harassment, but I mean, far greater numbers of people either are parents or want flexible working. This is quite a significant bill.
It stands to affect a lot of people. And what's so interesting about your response and my response when I was researching it was how much I wasn't aware of. And actually there has been data and polling to suggest that there is a problem, that people aren't aware of this legislation and they're not really aware of what's in it, and that it could be really popular for Labour at a time when they desperately need a few wins and not many people know about it. But it's also interesting that when you look across the media, there is a real sharp divide on how publications and media outlets feel about this. Like, rather predictably, if you read anything from The Spectator or The Telegraph or The Times, they are really against it because they think this is really going to dampen growth. Always this buzzword, growth, and that businesses, particularly small businesses, they just won't be able to hire people, and it's going to be a nightmare for them, and kind of fears over whether they would move closer to AI or automation because they're so nervous about hiring people who they then can't get rid of if it's not working out. And then if you look over at the left side, also rather predictably, like The Guardian, they're seeing this as supporting workers and a massive win for the ordinary working person. And if you have happier workers who are better taken care of, that's what drives growth, because that's going to make your business more strong. So it's very interesting.
I feel like as well, it's worth pointing out that this was all in their manifesto. And if we compare it to removing jury trials, which wasn't in the manifesto, this is something that the country voted on. This is traditional Labour values, and this country did vote in a Labour government. And I think sometimes we slightly, when we discuss policies and stuff, move away from the idea of like, they presented a manifesto, the country voted on it, they got the biggest majority that we've seen. And so I kind of think like, well, in those situations, more power to them.
Although there's a strategic point there, isn't there, Harriet, which is often the reason that the media in particular focuses on things that weren't in the manifesto, as Labour then did bring in a whole load of things that weren't in the manifesto that caught the public attention. It was sort of their fault in terms of managing that situation, isn't it? The winter fuel payments, for example, was a discussion that maybe didn't need to be had if they were going to reverse on it.
Yes, but on the other hand, I would not say that the media particularly covered themselves in glory with their coverage of that move. I mean, it did make... Many people argued that it made significant financial sense, and also argued that the country very much needed that sort of financial sense, and the ensuing brouhaha that was so disproportionate to the small number of people that would have been affected and the small amount of money that we're talking about was, I think, a colossal failure on the part of the media. But that is another story. In terms of this employment rights bill, I do think it's very interesting that certain left-wing publications are talking so positively about how this could protect gig economy workers and freelancers when they are so complicit in perpetuating so many of the negative working conditions for gig economy workers and freelancers. But that's also a separate issue. In terms of whether or not this legislation will actually get through, it's worth saying, I think, that there are criticisms of a blanket ban on NDAs and confidentiality clauses with regards to harassment and discrimination. It doesn't target individual cases or groups, but it's sort of general principles. So it kind of assumes all of the circumstances will be the same, and that the confidentiality clause is always an attempt to silence a victim, which is likely not true. But I think that in terms of the message that it sends, not just to the voting population that what they promised in their manifesto will be delivered by the government, but the message that this sends not just to victims of harassment and discrimination, but to potential perpetrators. Zelda Perkins, her response to this was that this is the beginning of abusers having to change their behavior, not because somebody's wagging a finger at them, not because they're told to, but because they have to. There's nowhere for them to hide anymore. They just have to effing behave themselves.
Okay. Up next, we're splitting the G. It's great crack. That's after this. Jamie, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This week, we learnt about the pluck of the Irish.
No, not Irish. Not Irish. It's spelled C-R-A-I-C, incredibly Irish. But I think it would get confusing if you spelled it C-R-A-C-K. What's the crack we would associate? We'd use the word crack for fun, or like, what's the story? That it's a kind of versatile phrase.
Actor Paul Mescal playing a game of Irish or not Irish with Variety on their YouTube channel. Jamie, can I tease this is my fault, by saying splitting the G. Can we just first of all define what that is? Because this is the new phrase I've learnt today.
Yes, if you are a Guinness drinker, there is a game that you can play with a pint of Guinness called Splitting the G, which is drinking the Guinness down. Depends how big your gulps are, really, but it's usually like 2.5 big gulps, I would say. And then you can get the level of the pint. Well, there's two games. One is on resting in the middle of the G in the Guinness glass, so when you look at it. And then one that I have also played is above the Guinness line. It's called Splitting the G. I would say it was fun.
If it's called Splitting the G, it's surely about getting it down to the cross-level bit of the G.
Yeah.
Above the G just isn't the game. The second game's wrong.
But some people play different rules and they're idiots.
Anyway, I'm not a ginfluencer, which is another word that I've learned today. But glad we got that out of the way. But it's indicative of the crack pack, another word I've learnt, which is sort of the trend for, you're bringing us this week, Irish culture kind of permeating all culture.
Yes. So the crack pack is obviously a play on the Rat Pack and is related to Irish actors that have been dominating popular culture. Actors such as Saoirse Ronan, Colin Farrell, Brendan Gleeson, Cillian Murphy. I guess the story this week is really off the back of the furore around Kneecap. There was an article in the New Statesman by Faye Curran that I would recommend everyone reads, because it's a fairly biting assessment of the kind of London penchant for Irishness and the desire from some left-wing, centre-left people within London to portray themselves as Irish, and the kind of love of the Irish. And she's obviously Irish, and she's writing it from a perspective of how embarrassing that is. I'm bringing it as a discussion point because obviously Irish culture is there's something called the Green Wave. It's very important. It's a big part of our culture now, not just the actors, but the books, people like Sally Rooney. Also, there is a kind of perception of Ireland as being this place that is quite progressive, pro-Palestine, maybe doesn't have some of the colonial scars, given the fact that they obviously have their own issues with British rule. But I wonder how much of it is to do with our own, within the UK, our own issues with Britishness and and our national identity. Obviously, in the 90s, we had Cool Britannia, and it seemed pretty cool to be part of the UK and Britpop. That isn't the case anymore. I'm gonna put it out there. I don't see.
Yes, this is potentially about our self-loathing. There's uncool Britannia.
I think so.
Let's find an island near us.
There's a fetishization of Irish culture because of how much we hate ourselves as British people.
I think that's doing a bit of a disservice, actually, to the long-standing fascination with Irish culture, and more specifically Irish music, Irish literature, film stars, poetry. It disproportionately punches above its weight culturally and artistically, and has always done. So I think that, yes, obviously there is a certain element of like a little bit of like, it's as Faye Curran was writing, it's no longer cool to be descended from the oppressors. But Ireland has always punched above its weight in terms of culture and art. And that has always, I mean, you can go back to Riverdance, you can go back to James Joyce, you could like music, traditional poetry and storytelling. I think that we should consider how great a lot of these Irish cultural kind of megaliths are at the same time.
Hold on, but which is it, Harriet? Either, yes, Oscar Wilde, Jonathan Swift, etc., or it's a new thing, the Green Wave, it's coming, look at the big peak in popularity of Irish stuff. Can it be both? Are you saying there's just been sort of a groundswell and now it's reached a peak?
It can definitely be both. I mean, Sally Rooney's Normal People in particular, when it was turned into a TV series in 2020 with Paul Mescal, like obviously that was an enormous global hit. So that really did kind of turbocharge the Green Wave, and then we've got this crack pack of all these actors, and last year Cillian Murphy actually became the first Irish-born man to win the Oscar for Best Actor. And obviously we've got all this major drama around Kneecap, this Belfast-based Northern Irish hip-hop trio who I actually saw play at Glastonbury a couple of weeks ago.
Did you? You and about 150,000 people by the looks of it.
It wasn't 150,000 people. West Holtz, I think, has a capacity for about 30,000, and they shut the field.
By the looks of it. It was a lot of people.
It was crazy. It was absolutely crazy.
The colonial thing, the colonial aspect of this debate really cracks me up, because when I was reading the articles about this, and people were saying that it's cool to be Irish because you want to align yourself with a nation of white people who don't have this icky, problematic, we once had an empire thing. It's not like Ireland chose not to have an empire. It's not like they were offered an empire and were like, no, we're better than this. They just didn't have one. I'm sure if Ireland had a chance to have an empire, they would have done. So I find that really, really funny. But what I do think, I completely agree with Harriet. Like, it's not anything new. Like, Irish culture has always, been huge. I mean, I lost count trying to name all the bands I grew up with: The Cause, Bewitched, Boyzone, Westlife. It goes on and on and on. Exactly. So it's always been there. Ditto, literature and all the rest of it. But I do think what's more interesting is to examine why Ireland has always punched above its weight culturally. That's the more interesting question.
Well, go on then.
Well, I don't think it's an easy question to answer, and I speak with no authority on the subject whatsoever, except I will say my husband is Irish, so he might be listening to this. But anyway, here's my shot. I think there is a particular alchemy that happens in the cracks between a very strict Catholic society and a very ancient Celtic people who are wild, tortured romantics and always have been. And I think in that's where you find a lot of where they're, fertile ground for their culture. And I would also say that I think a big part of Irish identity is the anti-Englishness. I think that the legacy of their treatment at the hands of the English still plays a very big part of their identity. And you can see that when they do feeling an affinity with Palestine. And I was watching, I don't know if any of you guys were watching the documentary on iPlayer about Live Aid, the 40th anniversary of Live Aid, which was obviously the brainchild of Bob Geldof, and Bono also featured.
And his wife.
Yes, and Bono featured very heavily in it, and he talks about the folk memory of famine. So even though he didn't actually experience the Irish potato blight and is obviously a huge mega star and very, very wealthy, it was interesting that he brought that up as he had seen these Ethiopians starving. I think there is that sort of anti-Englishness thing and an affinity with oppressed people that can make it a very powerful culture.
More prosaically than that, though, Jamie, I know that, Felicity mentions Kneecap, and obviously they're famously rapping in their native language, but that's new. Isn't it just that Irish people speak English when they make records and books? And, England and Scotland and Wales also punch above our weight, don't we, internationally, because of the British Empire, actually. So it's not as simple as just like people like things that are anti-English. They also like reading and listening to things that are in English, and that's because of the British Empire.
Yeah, I think that's definitely, that definitely plays a part in it. It's interesting with Oasis coming back, they had a huge amount of Irish, there was the Irish flags, and they've tapped into the fact that their family history is Irish. I think it's definitely true that throughout history, Ireland have punched above its weight. I think the other thing that's interesting is when you really dig down deep into it, how progressive is Irish society really? It looks like it's moving forwards because of the kind of ways in which it's beating back against the Catholic state. But this is all, from quite a low base, it's moving forward. And also the trouble that they now have with the right wing and nativist and racism within Ireland is a real issue in terms
the riots
of
we've seen in Northern Ireland this summer.
The debates around what is Irishness and can you be Irish if you're not white, and all of these questions. So it's a caricature of the country to say that they are all these progressive.
Also, just to add to that, Ireland isn't cool because last year it was named the world's 9th most significant tax haven, and everyone, it's kind of like one
That's
of the worst
cool.
places.
I would love
for,
to evade tax.
Sure, but in terms of being like progressive and all that sort of thing, they actually, all the stuff about like Apple having to pay back millions or billions of pounds or whatever it was, because Ireland was just like, we're not gonna tax you. So not cool.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a fair bit of tax evasion over here as well. But one thing we haven't mentioned actually about Ireland and Northern Ireland is that they really invest in their artists, I think, in a way that you can say that England is not doing at the moment, and particularly in the last few years with all of the cuts to the arts sector, is their funding and investment and their artistic endeavours being kind of tax-free. There are ways in which the Republic in particular supports its artists that we could really learn from. But you just mentioned that the Irish language, and I think that's a really interesting thing that actually is very new, that Kneecap in particular are kind of leading this revival in the Irish language. So I think it was quite recently that it was spoken for the first time during PMQs. Duolingo says that more than 2 million people are studying it globally. Mo Cara, who's a member of Kneecap, actually went to Belfast's only Irish language secondary school. So it's really interesting that actually there's the number of boys taking the A-level in Irish in Northern Ireland apparently nearly doubled last year. So that is new. And then there's the music aspect, obviously the success of the film Sinners, which features a lot of Irish trad music, a lot of folk ballads, and kind of that really sent a lot of Irish trad music kind of dominating the charts. So that there are ways in which that this is new and this is a resurgence, and that's really interesting.
Okay, however trendy it is, we're going to the pub. I'm buying you all a pint of Guinness. Are you drinking it?
I'm not a massive Guinness fan, I have to say, but I do think it's indicative of you having not spent any time on dating apps in the last few years, because splitting the G is consistently cited on like people like, can you split the G? See, like, I'll take you for a date if you can try it. It's absolutely everywhere. So that in itself like puts me off.
Well, how dare you say I'm out of touch? I've just offered to buy you a Guinness, Harriet. What
Olly,
could be more...
aren't you married? Like, why would you be on dating apps?
Felicity, would you like a Guinness?
I have enjoyed a pint of Guinness in the past, but now that it's become such a scenester thing, I would stay clear of it because I just think it's so embarrassing.
Jamie, are you really more of a Kilkenny or a Murphy's man?
It was interesting that I was in South East London quite recently, and there were quite a few pubs now that are only stocking Murphy's as a kind of two fingers up to Guinness and Diageo and everything else. So it's obviously moving on. Time is moving on, but I'm still a Guinness fan. It's a good drink. What about you, Ollie?
Well, no, I'm with you. Although next time we're together, let's split the M. My thanks to Jamie, Felicity and Harriet. You can follow this show for free. You can get every episode as soon as it's released. Just search for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts, then tap follow. You can also get 6 free issues of The Week magazine with a trial subscription if you go to theweek.com/subscriptions. You can also now watch us on YouTube if that floats your boat. In the meantime, I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Ollie Peart at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to Unwrap next week, bye-bye.